Okay, so now let us talk about collective narratives. So we've seen that there's already some similarities in the futures that we imagine, that there's some kind of patterns. And if we dig a bit deeper, what we can see is that there might be more similarities because many of us share a kind of dominant cultural paradigm, or we share the same narratives and meta narratives that, the kind of structure of narratives that we talked about earlier. And the reason that we do really goes back to that evolutionary capacity for stories to influence a great many people. So, actually, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I share with you some 10 narratives I'd like to talk about, I just wanted to do a quick word on how we come to think about a narrative, or why do we form narratives in our head. And I like to use this metaphor of the stars in the sky. So, if we think about it, we ingest millions of points of information every day through the experiences that we have, through stories that we hear, through things that happen, news and media articles that we have. And we have to collect and process this information in a certain way. So, and the way that we do that is often through a narrative. So, just to give you an example, I've had lots of experiences where it comes to driving a car. I've driven many times. I've had people comment on my driving. I've seen statistics about driving. Maybe I've had a driving accident. I've seen movies about driving, right? There's lots of information about driving. But to make sense of all of this, I might pull together a story. And the story might be that I'm bad at driving and driving is dangerous. And the difficult thing is that this narrative that I have created, this coherent line that I've drawn between the stars, can impact three things. It can impact how I form my identity. So I am a bad driver. It can impact how I see the world. The roads are full of dangerous drivers, and it can guide my actions. It's safer if I don't drive. And once a story like this is laid out in our heads, it can be really difficult to budge that story because it's created these kind of neural pathways, these kind of default mechanisms for how we think about things. So we're going to look at some of the narratives now that might be in our heads that have impacted how we see the future without even knowing. Now, I could have given you many different ones of these. Actually, I was kind of a bit like, oh, which one should I choose? But I quite like these. These are 10 from a New Zealand researcher and writer called Alina Siegfried because they're quite easy to understand. You don't need a lot of knowledge around different discourses, and they've got a nice flip. So let's go through these quickly. That's interesting, Kezia. I'm sorry I brought up the driving example. I'll tell you how to fix it. We'll fix it in a minute. So the first of these stories. So these should be fairly self-explanatory, but we've got me. It's a narrative of it's everyone for themselves, and we're all responsible for our own circumstance. This is a narrative that is boiled into individualism. We have tree, which is seeing nature as a natural resource. Therefore, we should exploit this resource because that's what we do with resources. 3 is sustainable. This one might be a little bit provocative, but I'm going to put it in here, which is that what we need to do in the future is just be sustainable. If we just use what we can replace, and everything will be okay. We can keep growing. 4 is stuff, that the epitome of success is to own more stuff. 5 is scarcity, that resources are scarce and there's not enough to go around. 6 is competition, that competition is the best way to drive innovation. 7 is doing, that we always need to be doing something. We need to be productive. We need to be that American businessman that is getting the fishermen to fish all the time. 8 is West, that Western culture is somehow superior. 9 is mankind, and that the patriarchal structure is natural and the best way to organize things. And 10 is now, that we should live in the now because life is short and enjoy it while you can. Okay, so let's look at the counter narratives. Everyone might like these a bit better. So, first one, from me to we. So, instead of everyone for themselves, this narrative that we are inextricably connected with each other, and not just with each other, but with everything on the planet, which is actually the second one, which is instead of nature being seen as a natural resource, us understanding that we are nature. What we do to nature, we do to ourselves, because everything is inextricably interconnected. Oh, okay, excellent. All right, where are we up to? Stuff to enough. This is one of my favorite ones. That the key to happiness is being content with enough. And also, just as a really quick side note, some interesting research done on what actually makes us happy. And really, it's things that release endorphins that are things that we do in groups or that give us joy because we get into creative flow. So we can get those little dopamine hits from buying things, but if we want lasting happiness, we actually need to chase singing together, walking in nature, feeling connected. So I kind of love that one. Scarcity to abundance. Instead of resources are scarce and there's not enough to go around, with the right systems in place, that comes that systems change, Christina. There's actually more than enough to go around. Going to the next page, competition to collaboration. I like this one as well because I think it's really easy to mistake survival of the fittest to be about competition. It's not. It's about adaptation, which often involves nature working together with other animals, cross species. And also, when it comes to collaboration, we've seen these great examples of hive mind activities. So, when multiple brains with different perspectives and different experiences come together, people can achieve a lot more. From human doing to human being, that there is a time to work and a time to rest, and that maybe we don't need to be working and doing all the time. Western culture to the rest of culture, that knowledge comes in many legitimate forms, ways, methodologies, and that we have so much to learn. We don't just, not just this scientific objective gaze is not the only way to know things. From mankind to humankind, that the gifts and approaches of all genders, and I would say all cognitive diversity, cultural diversity, everything has value and has power. And from now to forevermore, and I think this is probably the most relevant one to us, which is that life, not the life is short and you can enjoy it, but we are just a tiny speck in the history of humankind, and there are many generations to come.